Thank you so much, Bruce. It's really good to be here at Cornerstone Christian Church, and it's amazing as you get on in the Christian life, you end up meeting people from way back, and it's really nice to meet quite a number of friends. I won't say old friends, but quite a number of friends here today, and lots of new faces as well. So let's just make sure that this is going to work. Going the right way? It is. It works. So we're going to talk on the theme of creation, of course. I'm with Creation Ministries International. Creation, why it matters, why is it an important thing? I trained as an engineer, and I worked with the electricity industry for many years, and that was a really good experience. And I met some folks today who that I used to work with. That was great. And when my children grew up, I went back as a mature age student and studied geology. And so after that finished, I ended up was able to work with Creation Ministries. Had a different name in those days, but it's now Creation Ministries. So that's my experience. I have one wife, and we've been married a long time. Somebody said to her, "How could you be married to the same man for this amount of time?" And she said, "Well, it's not the same man." Because we all change, don't we? And that's part of the joys of being married, experience the journey. So I got 3 children, and they've got children. And one of my daughters yesterday had a baby, which is really nice. And she's well, and the baby's well, and that's always a joy to realise that God is good, that they're so well. And so creation, why does it matter? A lot of people say, well, it's not really that important, it's a side issue. You know, we're focusing on the gospel, focusing on the New Testament. We don't want to go back in the Old Testament, go back to all that stuff. We are new creatures in Christ, and so many people say creation's not important. There's a reason for that, why people say that these days. But I just want to talk about some of the reasons why creation does matter, why it's so important to us today. And I'm sure that many of you will identify with these. And it's got to do, we've got children. We want to see children grow up in the things of the Lord. We want to stay focused on the things of the Lord. And we want to be faithful to the end. But there are many traps, and there are many issues and temptations in the Christian life. As a matter of fact, the apostle says that we've wrestled not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So there's much opposition to us. But when we stay focused in the Lord, He keeps us safe. But there's a warning there in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8, it's a warning to the church there, and it says this: "See to it that no one takes you captive." We can be taken captive. How can you be taken captive? Well, you can be taken captive in chains, physical things, but he's not talking about a physical thing. He's talking about a spiritual thing, an idea, something in the mind. He says, by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental principles of this world, and not according to Christ. So there are invisible things which can take us captive. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And I want to give you an example of a young man who was taken captive. I could give you lots of examples. And it's a guy who grew up in a church. He had tremendous potential. He was very interested in the arts, and he was very enthusiastic about his life in the church. His name was David Williamson. Now, you've probably seen many of the plays and movies which are based on things which he wrote. And he says this, he says, "I don't pray to anything." He said, "I went to church in suburban Melbourne and had an intensely religious phase until I was 12. Till I was 12. So what happened? He said, "Then I heard about the theory of evolution, and it cured me of any idea that we were God's children." So there was this deceptive philosophy which took him captive. And he said, we are just a life form that's evolved reasonably successfully. There's no grand plan for the universe or for our lives. And so that's an example of one young man who's taken captive, and you probably know others who were involved in the church when they grew up, as they grew up and started coming across ideas and things they were taught at high school and university, dropped out. And you thought they just lost interest. You thought they were just not committed enough. And possibly it's because they don't believe it's true anymore, because of the philosophy and the ideas that they've heard. And you can understand people being, not thinking it's true, Dave Williamson, because this philosophy in our culture, and we're focusing on this idea of evolution, it is the dominant philosophy in our culture. And these are just some of the books and magazines which are around. You can put up hundreds of them. There's newspaper cuttings. It's part of the high school curriculum. It's just everywhere. And the idea of evolution, things like The Origin of Species, Nature, which is one of the prestigious scientific magazines, journals in the world, Time magazine, astronomy, it just goes on. And it's out there, and people see it. And the thing is, it's supposedly science. Science is reliable. Science is based on fact. It's not based on feelings. It's not based on faith. It's based on evidence. And so people think, well, it's true, compared with what I learned at church. And so that's why creation is, that's why it matters. But it's not just there. Like, here's just another example of, you go up to the Glasshouse Mountains, to the lookout, you've probably been there, and you see the sign. It's got a lot of good information there. It's one of my habits is to take photographs of these situations. And it talks about the Glasshouse Mountains forming over 20 million years or something like that. Or one of your grandchildren or your children in high school. Like my grandchild, when she was 14, she was grade 10, they really focused on evolution. And this is a textbook for science in year 10. And it's by Oxford University Press. I mean, what could be more reliable than Oxford University? And it's published, good pictures, beautifully laid out. And it's got a section there about evolution of people, where we came from. Where did we come from? And it says, here's the beginning of human evolution, the rise of the bipedal ape. And I was just talking to some young people yesterday. They've come Christians who grew up in the Christian communities in Southeast Asia, have a long history of being reached with the gospel. They've come to Australia, and they're talking about how they're learning about evolution at school. And I said, when you first heard about this, did you find it unsettling? Did it sort of worry you? And they said, yes, it did. It did. And if they don't get answers, if they don't talk to their parents about it, if their parents can't provide any information, you know, they think, well, there are no answers. That's where the facts are. And here's a testimony of a young girl, Maria. She says, I'm a new Christian, and I recently found your website when looking for answers to questions regarding science and God. Science and God, that's where the big questions are today in our culture, science and God. And they said the school system has instilled in my brain that the earth was millions and billions of years old. I heard that the Bible says it's 6,000 years old. He said, I couldn't for the life of me believe that. He says, this conflict makes me doubt my salvation continually. And so that's why creation is important. And we're going to deal with some of the issues through there. And I want to point you in places where you can find answers. And some people think that it's a very complicated issue. It is a big issue, but it's not complicated. And when you boil it back to the sort of the basics, the nub of the issue, it can be quite simple. But provided you know, and to find more information, you need to know where to look. And this little magazine is one. It's a family magazine, and so it's generally easy for kids to read. up to primary age, and you can have a look at it yourself, and it deals with lots of stuff to do with science and creation and the Bible and the age of the earth and scientists who believe the Bible, and it's a very powerful magazine. And I'll talk more about that later, but I want to just mention where you can get free information, and that is through a website called creation.com. And I mention this because I won't be talking about everything today. Bruce has very generously given me a lot of time today, and I will keep to that. But there'll be questions which I won't even deal with, and you'll say, well, what about this or what about that? Well, that's where you can go. Creation.com. Is that complicated? That's the first thing, creation.com. And if you want to find out an answer to a question, just type the question in the search bar. Your child comes home and they're learning about natural selection and about that, how that proves that evolution's true. You just type it in there and you find out answers, or about carbon dating, just type it in there and you'll find answers. Now, one of the things that also connected with that is we send out an email. And I was just talking to someone just before who said he finds it very, very helpful, that email, because he's able to share the information with some of his family. And this email is just comes out once a week or something. And I think probably quite a few people here are connected. Who's connected? Is everybody connected? There's a few people that aren't connected. Well, you can get connected very easily. And it's this, you might have wondered what these were on the seat for, to catch your interest. But it says, did you know? And if you turn on the back of that, you'll find the answer to the question. But there's also a place where you can fill out your email address. So that's a really simple way for you to connect to the email information system. And I think you probably have a pen there, which is cool. And if you'd like to fill it out while I'm talking, I don't know if you can do two things at once. You can fill it out, pass it along, and there's Friends of Creation Ministries that come and help, which is they have a passion to see, and they see the importance of this. And so just in a minute or so, they'll, if you hand it along, they'll walk down the aisle and collect them up. So why is creation important? I think I've really covered it in a way because of what's in our culture. But I'm going to deal with some specific issues and more personal ones. And one of the issues, that's how to fill it out, one of the issues is creation affects what you think about yourself. It affects your children, what they think about themselves. And what they think about themselves affects how they do in life, their motivation, the way they live. It affects the way they treat other people. And so the creation is just such an important issue for that, from that perspective. And whereas evolution, the idea is that everything evolved, there was no need for God, it all happened by natural processes, and we now understand the laws of the universe. So if you want to pass them along, this guy, Evan, thank you, Evan, will collect them. And here's a guy who was he was a professor of biological sciences at Cornell University. And he sets out, you know, like, it just talks about the implications of this idea of evolution. And he says this, and I need to just look at it myself. He says, how can we have meaning in life? How can there be meaning in life, he says. He says, when we die, we are really dead. Nothing of us survives. So if that's all we are, just material things which have been brought about by natural processes, he's absolutely right. There's no spiritual or anything else connected. Natural selection is a process leading every species almost certainly to extinction. How depressing is that? And it's natural selection cares as much for the HIV virus as it does for humans. There's nothing that cares about us in the universe. Nothing could be more uncaring than the entire process of organic evolution. And you saw what I put up about that textbook from Oxford University Press, teaching the young people that we evolved organic evolution from apes. There's nothing could be more uncaring than that process, and which is quite amazing. And so here's so if a young person asks somebody who is one of the elites, one of the leading lights, the question about, well, why am I here? What's my purpose? And the question is, what is man? Well, a leading British philosopher by the name of Bertrand Russell, what is man? Man is just a curious accident in a backwater. That's all. It's just a chance natural process that occurred. This guy here, Peter Atkins, an Oxford professor. What is man? Man is just a bit of slime on the planet. And this is what they really believe. This is the way they see evolution. That's its implications. Richard Dawkins, who was, you're probably very familiar with him, has written a lot of books. He's been really well, in the news. He says, what is man? He says, we live in a universe which has no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And so the young people, when they're taught about this at school, there's a little cartoon that we've got where the young person says, wow, your science class went for ages. You seem a little bit down. What happened? And she says, well, the teacher said we're nothing special. We just came from pond scum. We're just evolved apes. Says, well, what are they going to be teaching you in your next class? It says, self-esteem. That's on the curriculum. That's on the curriculum. So is creation important? Creation is really, really important. And is it an issue that's affecting our country? It's incredibly affecting our country. And so I just go on a little bit more about the importance of creation. Is that creation is the foundation of every major Christian doctrine. Now, as Christians, we can't say we're not going to worry about Genesis. We're not going to go there, because that's where it all comes from. It's the seedbed of every Christian doctrine is in Genesis. And here's an example. Creation is the foundation for. And there's a whole list. I mean, we could go on with the list and make it 3 or 4 times as long as this. The authority of God. God created, therefore he owns us. The goodness of God. God created a good world at the beginning. So he's a good God. He thought of everything. He provided for everything that we need. There's one that I left off, which is important. The power of God. He's all powerful. He's able to do amazing things. He created this whole world. And the value of man. Why is man valuable? Because we're made in God's image. 7-day week. I did a course on astronomy, and that was one of the things that in the textbook on astronomy they were wrestling with. Where did the 7-day week come from? It's got no connection with anything astronomical, and they sort of speculated about how, and various times in history people have tried to change the week to make it 10 days or something different. But the 7-day week, we know where it comes from. Man's relation to the creation. What is our relation to the creation? Are we sort of part of creation? Are we under creation? The Bible says that we are to rule over the creation. That's our relationship. The oneness of mankind. All people are related. We go back to one man and one woman. So, hi there, relatives. It's nice to see you. Don't come and ask me for a loan. But they say, where there's a will, there's a relative. Anyway, that's the way it goes. And the oneness of what marriage is. The origin of marriage is there, right there in Genesis, at creation. God created marriage. So the issue of evolution is a different story. So the idea of evolution is that everything evolved by natural processes, and there was no intelligence, no design, no thought behind it. It just happened by processes which we now understand. So if that's going to happen, you obviously need a long time. See, that's where the time comes from this philosophy. It wasn't that scientists discovered that the Earth is old. The thing is, when scientists came up with the idea of evolution and committed themselves to that idea, they needed an old Earth. So scientists didn't discover the age, they invented the age of the Earth in order for evolution to happen. And so you have a single cell which comes about from non-living chemicals. It has to pop into existence because everything has to be there and it has to be all functioning at the same time. I mean, you can't go to Holden and buy a motor car and say, well, I'll buy it I'll buy it on terms. And so this week I'll be able to afford one wheel. And then next month I'll be able to afford the second wheel. It's absolutely no use until it's all there. And it's the same with the living cell. And then over millions of years, different changes occurred, and eventually fish appeared on the earth where there were no fish ever before, and then amphibians and reptiles and mammals, and eventually people. So that's the idea of evolution, and we could go into it in more detail. But that's the competitor to the Christian faith in our country. 50 years ago, most people were involved in church or in Sunday school, or even before that. But there's been a huge dropping away in our country of Christian things. What's the fastest growing religion in the West, in our country? Hey? Atheism. No religion. Look at the statistics when they do the surveys. That's the one that's growing. Some people might mention some others, but that's the fastest growing religion. And there's a guy who's the head of the he's the Southern Baptist Seminary in the USA. His name is Albert Mohler. He's been there for a while, and he's written quite a bit about the importance of getting the beginning right and the trouble with evolution, or the threat of evolution, that philosophy in our culture. And he says this: the theory of evolution is no mere nuisance. It's not like a little buzzing fly that you sort of swat away, it bothers you. He says it represents one of the greatest challenges to the Christian faith and faithfulness in our times. And that's why the Creation Ministry is about. A lot of people are not aware that this is an issue in our culture that's happening. There's a lot of things in our culture which are happening, aren't there? And in the political arena. And we've been sort of asked to sort of fill out this position, to do this survey. This, thing is happening in the Parliament, and we've been involved and motivated to do that. But there's symptoms of an underlying thing. There's a new philosophy which is spawning all these things. And as Albert Mohler says, this idea of evolution is the greatest challenge to the Christian faith and faithfulness. And we can rise to it. We can be equipped to deal with it. We can make a difference, a huge difference in our culture. And that's what happened remember the book of Acts? That Christians turned the world upside down. And we can do it again, not us, but God can do it through us. One of my granddaughters, Lily, she encountered this idea of evolution, and it was very disturbing for her when she first encountered it. She should have been better prepared, but she wasn't. And her mother rang me up and said, oh, Lily's very upset, because she was a very active witness in her school, and she would share the gospel with her friends and try to get her friends to come along to church, to youth group. And when they started, the first day, they started teaching evolution and about the fossils and things like that. She found it distressing. And a friend said to her, well, Lily, looks like the Bible's not true after all. And so it really turned against her. And so one of the things, and I've actually written an article which I'll talk about, that as a result of my conversations with her. And but I said to her, one of the things that I said is, when you're in a science class, your science is something that's really, really good, but you've got to understand about science, and that science is based on experiment, observation. And a lot of people like that. They sort of think that if you believe in creation, you're rejecting science. But and all the good things that science produces, like aeroplanes and cell phones and satellites and modern medicine and that sort of thing, that you're rejecting it. But that is based on what we could call experimental science, based on observation. When I was at university, I studied gas flow in pipes. And we would make observations and experiments, and we'd have instruments, and you'd do the experiment, and you'd go away and calculate calculations, and it didn't seem right, so you'd come back and do it again. And so you can repeat the experiment, and it's done in the present. And so that's experimental science. But, you know, we're talking about what happened in the past. Evolution, right? Evolution. And you could call it historical science or forensic science or something like that. But you see, there is evidence, like that fossil. So that's the evidence. And my question, or what I said to Lily, if I got it up there, you ask yourself, what did they actually see? That's a key question. You ask yourself, what did they actually see? Or you can, if you're talking to someone, you can ask that question. Well, what did they actually see? Another way of putting it is, what's the actual evidence? That's science, isn't it? What is the actual evidence? What did they measure? What did they see? So you ask that. And so in this case, for example, there's evidence, there's a fossil. Yeah, so we see the fossil. We can accept that because it's observable, I can see it. But then they say, this fossil shows that fish grew legs and came out onto the land 300 million years ago. Well, they didn't see that. They didn't see it growing legs. Nobody was there 300 million years ago. So that's the story. So there's the evidence, and then there's the story. And I said, just realize they're telling you a story. It's not fact. How do you tell a fact? It's what's actually observed. And there's different ways of telling a story. You got the evidence, the same evidence. There's a dinosaur fossil. And you can look at that evidence the way most scientists do in the secular world, and they look at it through man's theories, and they come up with the idea of evolution, natural processes, and they tell a story about this dinosaur fossil. But you can understand this dinosaur fossil through a different lens, through the lens of the Bible, because the Bible is the truth, isn't it? It's the Word of God. Every word of God is true. So you can start in that way. So I'm just going to touch on a few things and just really to whet your appetite and some of the issues. And I want to talk about biology. Does the Bible talk about biology? It's not a textbook, but it does talk about stuff which affects biology. And for example, we read in Genesis chapter 1 these words, after his kind, after their kind. God created the plants after their kind. He created the fish after their kind, the animals after their kind. So that's a statement about biology, isn't it? That's the way that animals, that God made the animals, different kinds of animals. But the idea of evolution is that, no, things don't reproduce after their kind. Is that everything has actually evolved from a single cell. And so if you give enough time, one kind of thing will change into another kind of thing. Is that the idea of evolution? You got a single cell and it changes into fish, it changes into pine trees and porcupines. And that's the way it happens. And so it's not after their kind. And we could go into the evidence of this, and we don't have time to deal with it in detail this morning. But one of the things that is presented as evidence for this, and I put an X through it because it's not true. So you know it's not true. So at least I'm not giving you the wrong image. But one of the things that's put forward as evidence is variation within a kind. See, God created different kinds of animals, different kinds of things, and he created them with the ability to vary. I mean, you look around here, everybody looks different, yet we're all part of the humankind, aren't we? Mankind, humankind. So there's variety. So it'd be amazing if everybody looked the same. You wouldn't know who you're talking to, would you? So we all look different. And so God created the ability to... So evolution, the people who are pushing this, put forward variation within a kind. And one of the classic ones is the idea of the peppered moths. Who's heard of the peppered moths? A few. I'll ask for who hasn't, but that's all right. The idea of the peppered moths, this is around a long time. This is out of the textbook. It's part of the normal things that kids learn in year 10. We know evolution's true because of the peppered moths, right? And so there's dark ones and light ones. Can you see the dark one? Can you see the light one? No. There's the light one there. See there? Can you see the light one now? That's the light one. And so the story is that the birds would eat the dark ones. They lived on the trunks of the trees. This is a story, and you go to our website to find out more detail. But they lived on the trunks of the trees. The birds would eat the dark ones. And so there are a lot more light-coloured moths than dark-coloured moths. And then what happened was, due to pollution and the industrial stuff, the tree trunk went dark. So can you see the light one now? Can you see the dark one? It's just there. Here it is there. Can you see that? That's the dark one there. Guess what happens now? The birds eat the light ones. And so there are a lot more dark ones now than there were light ones. See, that's evolution. That evolution's a fact. Do you get that? And the kids look at it and they think, evolution's a fact. And there's a lot of stuff like this, but this is variation within a kind. What was at the beginning? Dark and light moths. What was at the end? Dark and light moths. What's changed? Basically, nothing's changed. They're not changing into something else. There's no evolution that's going to change a lizard into a bird. It's just changing, well, it's not even changing the moths, really, at all. And so it's not evolution. And so people will say, like this scientist will say, well, I see evolution happening in my lab. And there might be somebody that you know that is a research scientist in something biological, and they will say it's a fact. And you, not knowing much about it, think, well, it must be a fact. I know him, he's a respectable guy, but he's got in his mind, he might be doing research into moths or butterflies or something, and he's looking at how the environment affects them and all that sort of thing. But the person he's talking to pictures in his mind that he sees microbes changing into people over millions of years. Two different things. And this is probably one of the key things to understand. He don't see that. You see variation within a kind, and it's actually going the wrong way for evolution. So there is variation. What are dogs? Dogs change. They change. What do the dogs change into? Dogs. There's variation in dogs, and so that's the dog kind. And there's horses, the horse kind. You've got a horse, a donkey, and a zebra, and these can all interbreed. They can produce. Often their offspring are not fertile, but often they can be fertile, and so it means that they're part of an original horse kind. There's only need for 2 horses on the Noah's Ark, and one of them would have had some stripy genes. And here's a zebra, cross between a zebra and a horse. Do you know what they call that? A zorse, of course. See the heading of the David Catchpole loved alliteration, and there it is up there. Isn't it cute? You can look up on Google and you'll find lots of examples of crosses between horses and zebras and donkeys and horses and all sorts of stuff, and zebras, really cool. So this issue is that the key point is that natural selection is not evolution. There's a free brochure over there about, do you know the difference between natural selection and evolution? And it's such a simple thing to get your head around, and it's not taught at school because, in a way, they really like it to be blurred so that you confuse the two. So when you see natural selection, they'll say, see, evolution's happening. And this guy here, he's on our Facebook page some time ago, Matthew Shaw. He said, I'm a year 12 student, and I've been reading creation stuff for years. So that's pretty cool for a boy, isn't it? You know, cool on reading this stuff. He says, it's a lot of fun, and I've actually found that I'm acing year 12 biology. He learned about his year 12 biology where? In Creation magazine. Because basically we get to the nub of it there. And he said, specifically evolution, because I seem to know more about it than my teachers. Because they don't really understand the difference between natural selection and evolution. And but we won't go very further. And so there's a book that we have which has got a lot of information in it. So you're all awake, you're all good. So I think we got right for time, are we? Hopefully good. I got a question for you. Is this all good? A question. What came first? The sun or the land plants? The sun or the land plants? What came first? Who thinks the sun was first? Who's for the sun? Okay. Who's for the land plants? Okay. Who doesn't know? Who doesn't care? Very good. Well, you see, remember we talked about two ways of looking at things? Two ways. And basically the answer to this question depends on the way you're looking at the world. You didn't know that you look at the world through a certain pair of glasses, did you? This sort of question reveals what sort of glasses you're using in your mind. Because we pick up the glasses from what we see around about us, we don't actually consciously pick them up. And so the idea is that there was no Earth or Sun at one stage in the world, in the universe, and it was just filled with cloud of gas and dust. Have you heard of that? Swirling gas and dust. And the story goes, it came together and the sun formed. Nuclear reactions formed on the sun, and then the planets formed basically at the same time. So that was, the sun was first, and there was no life on Earth. It was really boiling hot, and so eventually life formed in the oceans, and after millions of years it evolved out onto the land. So the sun was first, and the land plants came millions of years later, right? So those who voted for the sun, that's where that comes from. But this is an interesting one. What did they actually see? What did they actually see? There was nobody there. They didn't see it happen. They're just making up a story to try to explain how it all came about. And it sounds like a good story. A lot of people think it's really cool. But it'd be nice if there was somebody there that could tell us. And there was. God was there. He wasn't only looking at it, he was making it happen, and God said. And we read in Genesis, in Genesis about how it all happened, what the order things were, and different things on different days. God did it in 6 days. And people say, sure, it was 6 days. Yeah, 6 days. I wonder why it took so long. Why did God take so long? Because he could have done it in 6 minutes, couldn't he? That's the power of God. That's the God that is our, that we belong to, who loves us, and no matter what problem we've got, he's bigger than it. And so when did the sun first appear? When did that first appear? Day 4. What about the land plants? When did they first appear? Day 3. And so God, the earth was covered in water. God said, let the waters be gathered into one place. Dry land appeared. Then God said, let the earth bring forth vegetation. And it was so. And so the order's different. Isn't that amazing? And the interesting thing is, people think that if you just stretch out the days into long periods of time, you're going to solve the conflict between science and the Bible, so-called science. But you don't, because there's all this conflict with the order being wrong. And then people say, but how can plants survive without the sun? Well, it was only one day. But there was also light, wasn't there? On day 1, it was dark, and God said, let there be light. And so there was light, and that's another story as well. And I'm going to where are we going to? I'm going to flick through a few slides here, so that up to this one. Something else from the high school textbook. Again, on the issue of evolution. So they do teach the kids lots of good stuff. And if a young person is sort of equipped and prepared, they can cut through it. But here's a story about geology here. That's why I study geology, and you can see there's a fossil, carbon dating, there's a geologic, all the fossils, see the fossils? It looks, for some people you think, wow, that is so complicated. See, there it is. It says at the bottom, the history of living things is determined by paleontology. It doesn't start with Adam and Eve down the bottom. It's got people at the top, Down the bottom, it's got 500 million years. There's trilobites and that sort of thing. So this is the history of living things. How does that fit in with things? Has anybody seen this before? Wonder how it works? Wondering how it works? And we could go into a bit of detail, but I won't. But because of this, and because it's everywhere, people sort of think, well, I don't know what to do. I read in the Bible that God created in 6 days. Where do I fit these millions of years in? And there's all sorts of ways that people try to reinterpret Genesis. They say, maybe I'm reading Genesis wrong. And so I talked about day age, and then the gap theory. You've heard of that? Has anybody heard of that? And there's framework hypothesis. I won't go into those, but if you look up a commentary, or if you go to theological college, they will teach you these different theories about how Genesis could possibly be interpreted to fit in with millions of years. But the big issue is one issue about this, and so we don't have to go into all the details, and it's this. It's to do with Adam and Eve. Here they are. For those, I'll skip that too. It's to do with Adam and Eve. They're in the Garden of Eden. And God looked at it and he said, behold, it's very good, isn't it? So it's a very good world they're living in. And if we put those millions of years in, connected with all that geologic column in before Adam and Eve, that's where it belongs, millions of years. Basically, you've got them sitting on all these layers of rock, but you've got all these fossils in them, right? That's before Adam and Eve. And so their fossils talk about death, suffering, and disease. And there's a big issue there. Do you see why that is important for creation? That is that you can't have death before Adam and Eve. And so the Bible says, we read there, that death came in as a consequence of man's actions, the sin in the Garden of Eden. And evolution says that death and suffering's been around for millions of years. Absolute, there's a conflict there. And so and to resolve that, you've got this, that can't be right. And so we've got this fossil record, which I showed you a picture out the textbook, this fossil record. And how do we explain that? It can't be before Adam and Eve, all these dead things. It has to be after. And the thing that explains it after is Noah's flood. We read it in Genesis chapter 6, 7 and 8, description of Noah's flood. So I just want to touch on this briefly about Noah's flood, because Noah's flood was a catastrophe. And do catastrophes happen slowly, or do they happen quickly? They happen quickly. So Noah's flood means that all the geology happened quickly. And so that means it didn't take millions of years. The people that believe in millions of years, they don't believe in Noah's flood. Isn't that amazing? They don't believe in that. And so you could go into the Bible and have a look at what the Bible describes the ark, and how long it was, longer than a football field, 140 metres, higher than a 4-story building. It had 3 decks, a bottom deck, a second deck, a third deck. And so what you read in the Bible, it was big enough to do what the Bible said it did. And it had a carrying capacity, some 15,000 tonnes. It was incredibly stable. And all the animals went in. They came to Noah. They went in the ark. And then the flood came on the earth. The Bible describes that. And everything that had the breath of life in it perished. Birds, livestock, and other things that creep on the earth, and people as well. And so this geologic column here in the school textbook, this is the history of living things is determined by paleontology. No, it's the burial of living things during Noah's flood. See, so we haven't changed the data. It's the same information, but basically a different interpretation. But we do need to get rid of the dates, because nobody was there keeping a calendar. So the dates are an invention. And when you actually look at the information, you find that this is the part as the waters were rising. The world was being overwhelmed. And this is the part as the waters were falling. And this part of the column was post-flood. But that's another story. And there's a lot of creation geologists these days. You know, for example, this is Grand Canyon. Can you see it? And a person who is a geologist in, say, a mainstream university would look at that and they would think to themselves, a little bit of water over a long period of time. There's a river down the bottom. Carved all that over millions of years. But this guy's a creation geologist, Stephen Austin, and he looks at that and pictures Noah's flood, catastrophe, and that sort of thing, and he thinks to himself, a lot of water over a short time. And that gives geologists, creation geologists, a way of interpreting the geology, and there's a lot been going on. You go to Queensland and there's an amazing fossil that they discovered on a guy's property in the middle of Queensland near Richmond, and he discovered the head. These are two paleontologists from the museum, and they're digging it out, and they say, wow, there must have been some catastrophe here. Because if there wasn't buried rapidly, it would just be eaten up and it would rot away and there'd be nothing left. And it's on display in the museum. It's on South Bank. You can see this fossil. It's lying on its back, 4 metres long, and even the bones in its flipper are preserved. So it's a very fascinating thing to look at the fossils and look at the geology. Very, very good. And I just want to look at a couple more things. So we talked about why it's important, and I wanted to deal with a couple of issues which may have been concerns. And one of them is radioactive dating. People think that radioactive dating proves that the world is millions of years old. But the thing is, most people don't realise that radioactive dating, every radioactive date is based on an assumption. The guys, they make assumption. And so the date is not an objectively measured thing. Now I'll try to explain it like this. We just had the Commonwealth Games, and the swimming down there was really cool. And so basically this person's swimming along to the final touchdown. And when they touch down, there's a judge there who's got a very accurate watch. Very accurate. And when they touch down, he looks at his watch and he can tell the time that they touch, right? And the time is 7:41 and 53 seconds. Okay, so after reading this accurate watch, he can tell how long that person took to do the race, can't he? Can he? Yeah? You're saying he can't? It's a very accurate watch. What did you say? Depends when he started. He's got, even though it doesn't matter how accurate the watch is, if he only reads it when the guy touches at the end, he's got no idea as to how long he took because he didn't read it when he started. That's it in a nutshell. Nobody can go back in time and do the measurements as to when these things started. Every date that's calculated is based on an assumption. So how would you be in the Commonwealth Games where the guy says, I think we'll go for a record this time. He reads the watch and then he does a calculation and then puts the date in, the time in when he thinks it started. He said, wow, a new record. And he just assumed it. Isn't that incredible? So that's the way radioactive dating works. Now the scientists, they try to be methodical, they try to be consistent, and I've done work with that. But I'll just give you an example. Several examples. Dating of rocks of known age using potassium argon dating method. So here's an example. Mount St Helens, the eruption date of Mount St Helens was 1986, and when they measured the dates using this potassium argon method, it gave dates to 0.35 of a million years to 2.8 million years, and it was only 10 years old. There's articles about that on Creation magazine, the web. Kilauea in Hawaii, it's less than 200 years, the eruption, and it gave dates up to 22 million years. Because they estimated that the starting amount was wrong and it gave the wrong answer. And they knew it was wrong. Kilauea in Hawaii, it's 1800 to 1801 were the eruption dates. It gave dates of 160 million years to 3,300 million years. See, so, and if you want to look it up, I just hope that that's enough to sort of put a stone in your shoe to realise that there is an issue there. And that if you can't trust it when you have rocks of known age, how can you trust it when you don't know the age? So I'll just flick through a couple of other slides, and I just want to talk about the magazine. So we talked about how important creation is. One of the really big things is a DVD which we've put out called Fallout, which shows that if young people are given scientific information, scientific evidence as they're coming up through the church about how it supports the Bible and how they can trust the Bible, when they go to university, when they go to high school, they basically survive really well. They just continue on. What they're taught at school doesn't rattle them, and they continue on following through Christian things. But if young people are not given this information, they're just sort of taught from the Bible and not connected with anything sort of scientific evidence, when they get to the university and encounter this stuff, basically they drop out. And it's a very, very interesting interviews with young people as to whether they're still going to church or not. So it's an important thing. This guy, Jeremy, said, "Your writings played a big part in me becoming a Christian. My older brother got me a subscription to Creation magazine about 6 years ago." So that's why I like subscribing to it, and for others. And so the magazine, can I just talk about that briefly? Have you had a look through it? It's pretty pictures. They take off the wrapper. And the magazine's got, it comes out 4 times a year, and it's family level. So I want to talk about this because as a way of helping you get equipped. That's really the point of it. And so that if it comes out 4 times a year, and that means there's reinforcement. You know, you read one magazine, you stick it in a place in the home where people are going to read it, and then the next issue comes out and they look through that, and bit by bit, it affects, and like that guy said, I've been reading it for years and it's a lot of fun. So that I'd encourage you, if you want to get equipped and if you want your family to be equipped, magazine's a great thing. And 4 times a year. And I mentioned these DVDs, this Fallout. There's another couple of DVDs which we've got as a little encouragement to you. And I got a couple of testimonies here. This guy, a lady here, Colleen, says, "Thank you for this much needed magazine. The information empowers Christians to share the gospel." And there's another one by this guy. He said, I was converted when somebody gave me a Creation magazine. So they gave it to him, and it opened up his mind. He said, "I subscribed for 5 of my relatives. 4 of them have now come to the Lord." And so it's a very, very, very powerful thing. And so if you get... where am I? So basically, if you take out a 1-year subscription, we'll offer the free DVD for that as well. And if you take out a 3-year subscription, it's $32 for 1 year. But I think it's about $85 for 3. We give you that plus one of these, either this one or that one. How do you subscribe? This is inside. Everything's there for you. So when you pull out the magazine, you've got this little form. All you need to do is your address where we can send it. So we can do that. So just indicate on the top part whether you want it for 1 year or 3 years. Put your name and address there. And I didn't mention also you get a free electronic version, and so that will be sent to your email address. And you can share that with friends, up to 5 different devices, you can do that. And if you want to subscribe for a friend, a gift subscription, you use the bottom part and just put their name and address in, and which is really cool. So you're all set for to be able to subscribe. When you get home, you'll do it, right? When you get home, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, where did I put that form? I think I left it at church. Or you just get something comes up, the hot water system's leaking, you've got to get the plumber, and before you know it, it's gone. So how about if I just give a break, a 1-minute break, where you can fill it out now? Would that be a good thing? So I'll stop talking. If you need to talk to your spouse or something about it, that'll be cool. But if I give a 1 minute break, you can fill it out to get it, and that's done then, and you can get your free things. So I'll stop talking. So this goes for, I find it very hard. This is the hardest part for me. I'll stop talking for 1 minute, okay? And you can fill it out, those who want to do it. So there you go. Is that enough time? You've started. You can just finish it up now and hand it in. Just a couple of other things I want to just point out, and then I'm done. Are there anybody here that's at high school? Anybody here that's high school? You're at high school? Got a few people at high school? My granddaughter, I mentioned about my granddaughter and how she was distressed. I turned that into a little article. What I wrote and told her, I actually put an article there. 4 steps for surviving evolution classes at high school. So that's on the web. If you go to surviving evolution classes at high school, you'll find it. And it's very, very simple, very simple. And there's another article which I wrote called How Do I Do My Assignment About Evolution? This is more for, well, it could be at high school, but it's more for university level. What do I do if I'm studying environmental science and I've got to study about evolution and I've got to write an article about it and I don't believe it? What do I do? Do I refuse to do it? Do I try to promote creation and argue creation? What do I do? And so that article enables you to do a really powerful article, get very good results, and also to maybe put a little bit of a chink in the idea of evolution in your lecturer's head. And that article appears in that magazine, and towards the end of it, they publish it there, but you can get it on the web. So if you've got a friend who is sort of into a bit of scientific stuff, likes reading stuff and arguing stuff, this is a good book for them or for you if that's where you are. The Achilles heels of evolution, the 9 fatal flaws of evolution. And it's by some PhD scientists. There's another books. I mentioned this Refuting Evolution. There's an answers book. Probably some of you may have that. You can get that in a pack. The answers book deals with the questions, which is very common. There's another DVD called Is Creation a Secondary Issue? There's a major issue in the church today where a lot of evangelical churches say we're not going to touch it. Creation is a secondary issue. We just focus on the gospel. And this is by a lecturer at a theological college in Victoria, and he gives a very powerful lecture about how creation is not a secondary issue. There's one called Geology for primary school kids, Geology with Mr. Hibb. Mr. Hibb's a grasshopper, and he's got lots of activities for kids. And if you're not a reader, then there are lots of DVDs over there, so they're available for you, plus there's stuff on the web. And coming up this year, there's a Creation Super Camp up at Twin Waters, up on the Sunshine Coast. It'll be towards the end of September, the beginning of October, a Super Camp. So creation is not a secondary issue. Creation is a very important matter. And because the Gospels all start with creation. And in Colossians 2 verse 8 it says, see to it that no one takes you captive. And we as a church not only want our people not to be taken captive, but we want to see the gospel advance in our country. And it can. It can. God will do a great thing, and as we trust His word and answer the questions of other people. So thank you very much, Bruce, for the privilege of sharing with you today. God bless you, each one.